Hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to our second edition of Breaking News for this Monday. It is the second day of June, 2025. And today on our program, we have some really surprising events that have taken place since we last met just a few hours ago. We're going to start with a couple of head scratchers. In fact, all four stories are kind of head scratchers. So let's look at them. First of all, this story's been going around. The Jerusalem Post is reporting it also. U.S. nuclear deal proposal would allow Iran to enrich uranium in limited capacity. All right, this is supposedly what the United States has allowed in the proposal that they can enrich uranium after saying no enrichment, no enrichment, no enrichment. And so we'll see what's going on here. That's the latest story. And then from Israel HaYom, what happened to maximum pressure? What happened to the maximum pressure? The White House orders freeze on Iran sanctions. Again, another head scratcher. What's going on here? And then we have dueling stories about what's taking place with Hamas and Israel as far as the so-called ceasefire talks and the hostage release talks are going. According to YNET, Hamas signals willingness for talks, but Israel sees no real shift. And that's a story we promoted today. Very similar story. There's no real shift in the position of Hamas. And yet we have this story from Israel National News. Israeli officials, we can reach a deal. So which is it? Well, I guess we'll find out. All right, let's go through these headlines and try to make some sense out of them. Headline number one, U.S. nuclear deal proposal would allow Iran to enrich uranium in limited capacity. This follows earlier reports from Monday that Iran is posed to reject a U.S. proposal to end a decades-long nuclear dispute. The U.S. nuclear deal proposal that was allegedly given to Iran would allow limited and low-level uranium enrichment. This is a Walla report. That's an Israeli news site, by the way. Walla reported on Monday. Limited uranium enrichment would be for a to-be-determined period of time, Wallace said. This proposal contradicts statements from top officials. Contradict everything the U.S. has been saying from the very beginning, actually. This follows earlier reports on Monday that Iran is poised to reject a U.S. proposal. We did that story in the first breaking news episode to reject a U.S. proposal to end a decades-long nuclear dispute. An Iranian diplomat said, slamming it as a non-starter that fails to address Tehran's interests and leaves Washington's stance on uranium enrichment unchanged. Now, is it unchanged or is it not unchanged? Again, we don't know. Okay, so again, if this is true, and we don't, and again, we see every day these fake news stories that are supposedly sourced by a number of people in the know. If it is true, it's bad on many levels. For one thing, that would mean the U.S. is backed down from their stance of no enrichment. It also appears that they so desperately want a deal, they're going to do whatever it takes, and this is not in a good position to be. Now, why, we ask, with all the latest information revealed over the weekend about Iran cheating for some 20 years on their nuke program, would the U.S., who should be taking the lead, allow all this to happen? We just don't understand. Now, again, maybe this story will turn out to be untrue. We don't know, but it's being reported across the board on Israeli websites, so we'll wait and see. Headline number two, and this is from Israel Hayom. What happened to maximum pressure? The White House orders a freeze on Iran's sanctions. The directive to suspend action against Iran was distributed to the National Security Council, the Treasury Department, and the State Department. It also affects U.S. policy towards China, which purchases 90% of Iran's oil exports. Some officials view the move as merely a slowdown to reassess future measures, while others fear it signals a broader suspension. The Trump administration has ordered an indefinite halt to new sanctions on Iran. And this might be the operative word here, new sanctions, raising questions about the future of its maximum pressure campaign ahead of nuclear negotiations, according to a report in the Wall Street Journal. The directive came last week from White House spokesperson Carolyn Leavitt, who instructed the National Security Council, the Treasury Department, and the State Department to cease all new actions targeting Tehran. A source close to the White House said Trump's pressure campaign is now stuck in place. The order to freeze sanctions, issued without a specific end date, followed the last-minute blocking of routine Treasury Department sanctions. Since then, at least 6 additional sanction passages have been delayed, and no new American sanctions against Iran have been announced since May 21st. Next heading is disarray in the National Security Council. That the order came from the White House spokesperson rather than the National Security Council or the Treasury Department reflects growing dysfunction within the administration. Now, this is interesting. The National Security Council has been thrown into chaos after the Trump administration sent more than 100 staffers on leave. Responsibility for new policy has not been clearly divided among agencies, and the council's communication teams is reportedly disintegrating, according to CBS News. Well, we don't believe anything CBS says, but it just doesn't look good anyway. Asked for comment, the White House did not deny the suspension. Instead, Deputy Spokesperson Anna Kelly said in a statement that all new decisions regarding sanctions would be announced by the White House or relevant government agencies. Now, what's interesting here, as the story goes on, the freeze not only affects Iran, but the administration's also policy towards China, which purchases over 90% of Iranian oil exports. Japan, Europe, India, and Southeast Asia are also impacted. It remains unclear whether the freeze applies solely to new sanctions or also to enforcement of existing ones. All right, here's the bottom line. Whatever it is, it certainly doesn't sound like maximum pressure, does it, to force Iran to make some type of deal. However, if the previous story is true, that they are going to allow them to enrich uranium even to the smallest degree, then things are getting so much worse. Well, with so much confusion as to how all this plays out, it's really anyone's guess. But this is where we're at right now. We're not making up the stories, we just report them. So we're just as lost as you are in all this. But hopefully soon we'll get some explanation here, some light on this. All right, now turning to the Israel Hamas, we've got dueling stories on this also. Hamas headline number 3: Hamas signals willingness for talks, but Israel sees no real shift. And again, that's what we talked about this morning. Despite public claims of readiness to negotiate, Israeli officials say Hamas's demands contradict the American framework and reflect no genuine compromise. As military pressure grows, the IDF expands operations and revises humanitarian aid routes under mounting global scrutiny. At least, in other words, they're still going forward with everything. They're not allowing any supposed deal to throw them off until something is signed. After effectively rejecting the updated Witkoff framework, Hamas announced its willingness to immediately begin indirect negotiations. However, Israeli officials made clear that no delegation would be dispatched to Doha. That's in Qatar, of course. The decision came after Hamas submitted a list of demands, here we go, demanding again, that diverged sharply from the proposal presented by the American envoy. In practice, Hamas's position hasn't changed despite its public statements. The fundamental gaps remain, said one Israeli source. Now, one senior Israeli official emphasized, Israel agreed to the Witkoff framework as proposed. This is our position. Hamas's reply does not reference the framework at all. According to Israeli assessments, there have been no new meaningful developments, and professional sources noted that the differences remain vast, perhaps insurmountably so. No, perhaps they are insurmountably so. When you got two different red lines here, Israel says that the war will end when Hamas, is destroyed militarily, when they're no longer governing Gaza, and the hostages are released. And Hamas says the war ends when Israel leaves the Gaza Strip. We can start rebuilding again, and you start, helping with us with the humanitarian aid like you should, which they have been doing all along. But anyway, two totally opposite, goals. So how it can be reconciled just is seemingly impossible. Okay, so they said that Hamas has declared openness to negotiations appears purely tactical, meant to shift the narrative and deflect accusations of intransigence. So that sounds more like it. Now, again, here's what's good. On Sunday, amid the deadlock in talks, the IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir announced that further expansion of ground maneuvers are taking place in both the southern and northern Gaza Strip. He also directed the establishment of additional aid distribution and dispersal centers within the enclave, likely in response to mounting international pressure to broaden humanitarian access. And so this is where we're at. This is what we talked about this morning. This seems to be the case. But then we have this story from Israel National News. Israeli officials, we can reach a deal. Israeli officials with knowledge of the hostage and ceasefire negotiations say they have not yet collapsed, and efforts are being made to bridge the gaps with the terror organization. Israeli officials say negotiations for a hostage and ceasefire deal with Hamas continue despite the terror organization's negative response, U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff's new proposal. Sources with knowledge of the issue told CAN, as KAN or Khan, News on Monday, the negotiations have not yet collapsed, but the positions of the sides are distant, especially regarding the end of the war. We can still reach an agreement. Really? How do they conclude that? Sources from the mediating state say that the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt have been holding a series of talks with Hamas to bridge the gaps between the terror organization and Israel. Report also said that Qatari Prime Minister Al Thani met with Hamas overseas leadership in an attempt to find a way to overcome the gaps between Witkoff's current proposal and Hamas's corrections. Hamas remains, here's the key, remains steadfast on its demands for American guarantees to end the war. In other words, we'll sign something, but you have to guarantee there's an end game to the war where you will leave the Gaza Strip, and we will remain in power. We'll give you the hostages back, and then we'll basically recharge so we can do it all over again. Have another October 7th is basically what they're saying. Now, at the same time, this is interesting here. Turkey has also begun pressuring the terror organization. The head of Turkish intelligence, Ibrahim Kalim, spoke on the phone with Hamas's head negotiator, Khalil al-Hayya, and stressed Turkey's commitment to reaching a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, according to Witkoff's new proposal, 10 living Israeli hostages and the bodies of 18 deceased hostages will be released on the first and seventh days of the ceasefire. Hamas demanded the release be divided over 5 days, the 1st, the 10th, the 30th, the 50th, and the 60th. All right, so what's the truth in all of this? Is it deal or no deal? We know that Israel will go ahead with the fighting while all of this plays out, and hopefully we can get some clarity tomorrow. But right now, we're again in one of these times when you have all these stories coming around, and we just don't know what to believe. And like we say here, we don't jump to any conclusions. We wait and see what's going to take place, and then we go on from there. And so hopefully by tomorrow we'll have some clarity on all this. Maybe the U.S. can clear some of this up. But right now it seems very, very confusing. If it is true, though, that they actually in their proposal would allow Iran to enrich uranium to some degree, and Iran still rejects the proposal as not good enough, then we're in real trouble here because U.S. cannot keep capitulating to Iran to the degree that Obama did in the past. But we will see. All right, anyway, I'm Don Stewart, and the good news is in all of this, like we always say, that the Lord God has told us what's going to happen at the time of the end. We know that He will return, that many events that will precede it are predicted for us in Scripture, and they're all falling into place. So when we look at stories like this, your head starts spinning and you scratch your head and all this. At the end of the day, it's all going to work out. So tomorrow we'll have hopefully a fresher look at this, and we'll have some more positive things to say, or at least more clear things to say. And as we go forward with what's taking place, good news is we know where it's all heading, and that is if we're in Jesus Christ, we win. We're part of God's kingdom that's coming to earth at His time. Okay, I'm Don Stewart. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, as always, may our Lord richly, richly bless.